I went out of the court. They're all just pushing. They're all kind of like pushing you against the wall. And I was getting closer and closer to the.
Imagine being 20 years old, just finished a practice session at one of the biggest tennis tournaments on the planet, and all you want to do is walk back to the locker room. Simple. Routine. Except nothing about your life is routine anymore. The crowd that had been watching you hit for the last hour suddenly surges forward, all at once, like a single living thing. You feel the first shoulder, then another, then the press of bodies behind you multiplying, and before you even fully understand what's happening, your back is against a wall. Concrete. Cold. And the people pushing toward you aren't hostile. They love you. They adore you. Some of them flew halfway around the world just to watch you warm up, and that somehow makes it more terrifying because they can't stop themselves. They don't even know they're doing it. That is what happened to Alex Eala at the 2026 Australian Open, and the fact that it happened at a practice session, not a match, not a press conference, a practice, tells you everything you need to know about where this young woman stands right now in the world of tennis. She described it herself weeks later on the Players Box podcast, and the way she told it was so understated, so calm, that it almost made it worse. She talked about the wall getting closer, about feeling the crowd push, and realizing the people at the back couldn't see what was happening at the front. They were just moving forward because everyone else was moving forward, and she was the thing they were all moving toward. Her father was there. Her coach was there. And neither of them could do anything about it because you cannot reason with momentum. She eventually had to shout for space, had to beg for a gap in the crowd just to breathe, just to move, just to exist in that moment without being crushed by affection. And here's the part that stays with you. There was no security. Not a single person stationed between Alex Eala and hundreds of fans at a Grand Slam practice court. Because at the time of the Australian Open, her ranking sat outside the threshold that automatically triggers those elevated protections. The tour has systems. It has protocols. It has structures built over decades to manage player safety. But those structures were designed around a certain kind of fame, a fame that rises in a predictable, linear way alongside rankings and titles and Grand Slam results. What Alex Eala represents is something the system never quite prepared for. Her fame doesn't follow those rules. It never has. To understand why Melbourne happened, you have to understand where she comes from and what she means to the people who follow her. Alex Eala is Filipino. She was born in Manila, trained across the world, developed through one of the most storied academies in tennis history, and somewhere along the way became something larger than a player. She became a symbol. The Filipino diaspora is one of the largest and most globally dispersed communities on Earth, with significant populations in the United States, the Middle East, Australia, and across Europe. And when one of their own steps onto a professional tennis court, it isn't just sport. It's identity. It's proof. It's every parent who moved across the ocean for a better life watching their dream represented in real time on a Grand Slam court. That is the weight she carries. Not just a racket bag. Not just match pressure. She carries an entire nation's pride onto surfaces that were never designed to hold that much emotion, and she does it every single week on the tour. Melbourne wasn't just her home Grand Slam in the emotional sense. It was ground zero for what happens when cultural gravity collides with institutional inertia. The NTC courts where she practiced don't have permanent barriers separating players from the public the way the main show courts do. It's a more informal setting, which works perfectly fine for most players. A handful of fans, some polite applause, maybe a few autographs on the way out. For Eala, it became something else entirely. And what makes this more than just one scary moment is that it isn't isolated. She said it herself on that podcast. The crowds at her practices have been growing since the start of the year. She talked about arriving at a court and seeing people already there, waiting, before she'd even started warming up. Not after a match. Not during a tournament run. Just practice. Just hitting balls. And the cities where this keeps happening aren't random. Melbourne, Dubai, New York. Every stop on the calendar that intersects with a significant Filipino community turns into something beyond a tennis tournament. It becomes a gathering, a homecoming, a reason for people to take days off work and travel hours just to stand courtside and watch her serve. Jessica Pegula, the world number 5, told a story on that same podcast episode that puts the scale of this into perfect perspective. She and Desiree Crouchick were in Dubai during the same tournament week. Her coach heard noise coming from outside the hotel and couldn't figure out what it was. Turned out it was crowd noise from Alex Eala's match. From inside a hotel room, through the windows, across however many yards of open air between the building and the stadium, you could hear it. A top 5 players coach, someone who has been around elite tennis for years, had to stop and ask what on earth was happening out there. The answer was Eala. It's always Eala. And now think about what that means in terms of ranking. At the time of the Australian Open, she was ranked around 45 in the world. That is a solid professional ranking. Respectable. But it is not a ranking that has historically come with the kind of atmosphere usually reserved for the top 5, top 10, top 15 players on the tour. Players at that level don't typically need to think about crowd management at practice courts. They walk on, they hit, they leave. Nobody's pressing them against a wall. The conversation around Alex Eala's security situation might have stayed relatively quiet, stayed within tennis circles, except for what happened on that Players Box podcast. The show is co-hosted by 4 women, Pegula, Krawczyk, Madison Keys, and Jennifer Brady, who between them have decades of professional experience. They've seen fandom at every level. They know what big feels like. And when Eala told the wall story, it was Krawczyk who responded with something close to disbelief. Not dramatic disbelief. Just simple, direct, you can ask for security. That's it. That was the turning point, because Eala admitted that the thought hadn't fully crystallized for her yet. She was still in that psychological place where requesting a security detail at practice felt somehow out of proportion with who she was, or where she ranked. She didn't want to seem like she was overestimating herself. She mentioned something about not wanting to feel like her head had gotten too big. This gesture she made on the podcast, mimicking an inflated ego, and it said everything about how she sees herself versus how the world already sees her. Krawczyk pushed through that hesitation and told her directly, ask for it.
She did.
The next practice session, she was on a main court with security in place. Krawczyk's reaction when she heard the difference it made was immediate. She said, "Oh my gosh, the security helped so much." And then she said, "You're crazy big here." Not a fan account, not a headline. A fellow professional, someone who competes at the highest level of the sport, looking at her peer and telling her that the scale of her fame has crossed into territory that requires real protection. That validation matters more than almost anything else that's been said about this story, because it's not coming from the outside. It's coming from inside the locker room. It's coming from people who know exactly what elite tennis looks like and are saying plainly that what's happening around Alex Eala doesn't fit any normal category they've encountered before. And then Miami happened. And if Melbourne showed you the challenge, Miami showed you the character. During the 2026 Miami Open, videos started circulating on social media showing Eala at a fan interaction moment overriding her security. Not being overrun. Not losing control of the situation. Overriding it herself. Walking past the barrier. Moving toward the fans instead of away from them. She saw the people with the flags and the signs and the shirts bearing her name, and she decided that no barrier was going to stand between her and them. Think about that choice in context. She had just gone through the Melbourne experience weeks earlier. She knew what crowds could become. She'd felt the concrete wall. She'd shouted for space. And still, when she saw her people in Miami, her instinct was to go to them. Not because of brand management or social media strategy. Because she understands something fundamental about what she means to those fans. Every person in that crowd holding a Filipino flag in a foreign country, in Florida of all places, traveled to be there because they needed to feel represented. Because seeing her on that court means something personal to them. And she knows it. She feels it. And she refuses to let a cordon of security separate her from that connection, no matter what it costs her in terms of personal risk. Her Australian Open itself ended in the first round, a tough loss to Alicia Parks. She walked off the match court having lost, walked straight into a crowd that didn't care about the scoreline at all. The flags were still there. The chants were still there. The love didn't require a win, and that collision, losing on the court and being embraced so completely off it, hit her in a way she hadn't expected. She talked about the emotional confusion of it. Processing a defeat while being surrounded by that level of devotion is its own kind of complicated. But she responded the way she always responds. She went to Indian Wells and beat Coco Gauff. She went to Miami and won 2 matches before falling in the round of 16. Every setback followed by a step forward. Every difficult moment absorbed and converted into fuel. Now the clay court season stretches out in front of her. Linz, Stuttgart, Madrid, Rome, Roland Garros. 5 tournaments across Europe where the Filipino communities are growing, where her profile is rising, where tournament directors are going to have to answer that Melbourne question again and again. Is the infrastructure ready? Has anyone thought through the practice court setup? Is there a plan for what happens when hundreds of people show up before she even starts hitting? Because they will show up. That part is no longer a question. The WTA has spent years talking about expanding into new markets, reaching new audiences, building the sport beyond its traditional strongholds. Alex Eala is doing that job without a press release or a marketing campaign. She's doing it by existing, by competing, by being someone that millions of people scattered across the globe see themselves in. Tournament directors from Indian Wells to Dubai have already witnessed firsthand what it means to have her name on the draw sheet. The atmosphere changes. The ticket interest shifts. The noise levels do things that hotel guests don't expect. Her ranking is 45 right now, and will move up and down the way rankings always do for a 20-year-old still finding her footing at this level. But here's the thing about rankings. They're a snapshot. They capture results in a window of time and assign a number. What they cannot capture is cultural gravity. What they cannot measure is the size of the crowd that will be waiting for you at practice tomorrow morning regardless of how your last match went. That crowd is not going anywhere. It will be there in Stuttgart. It will be there in Madrid. It will be there in Paris. And the tennis world, the tour, the tournament directors, the scheduling committees, all of them are going to have to keep asking themselves whether the systems built for a different era of this sport are adequate for what Alex Eala actually is. She is not a top 5 player by ranking. She is something harder to define, and in some ways more significant. She is the proof that superstardom in women's tennis can now be built on a foundation of cultural identity and genuine human connection just as powerfully as it can be built on Grand Slam titles. The wall in Melbourne didn't break her. The loss in the first round didn't define her. The crowd noise from the hotel room, the overridden security barrier in Miami, the veteran players stopping mid-conversation to say you're crazy big here, all of it points to the same truth. Alex Eala has already outgrown the frame the sport built for her. Now tennis has to decide what it builds next.